Happy International Whisky Day, everybody. Hope you're all doing well tonight and will be joining us for some drams. We have a really exciting evening for you tonight. My guest tonight is a man that I've been very fortunate enough to work alongside for the last couple of years. He's been very generous with his time and his knowledge for me, and I'm glad to be able to share that with you all tonight. Before we jump into that, though, I want to give you a little bit of information on what we've been working on over the last couple of days at Tomaten. So we started doing these videos about a week and a half ago now, very much because I was bored that I wasn't getting out to see everybody and I wanted to connect with people. But that got us all thinking, and there's a lot of people around the world who have had to cancel trips to whisky festivals, who have had to cancel trips to Scotland as well. So over the last 2 days, we have been working on pulling together what we believe is the world's first virtual whisky festival. And on the 4th of April at 2 p.m. GMT, we will be hosting the Lockdown Whisky Festival. It will be presented and hosted by Roy Duff from Aquavitae, and I'm going to be joined with 10 of my friends from across the industry who are all coming together in one place to speak to you about the brands and the liquids that you love. So please join us for that. Some of you may have already had this news and may have already signed up. Some of you may just be hearing about this now. And over the next week or so, we're going to be releasing a lot of information about this and where you can join in. But my guest tonight is Tomatin Distillery's Master Distiller, Eunson. So please grab a glass and get involved. Good evening, Graham.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Oh, I'm very good, thanks. Very good. Sitting here with and ready.
Yeah, I was just watching that clip there and thinking that's a place I've not seen in a couple of weeks now. So looking forward to the day we can go back.
Exactly. Yes, I do miss it. I must admit, because sitting home here, although I've got a few whiskies, I've not got the sort of 160,000 casks to go and smell on a daily basis. So it's just not the same.
Well, now that's an interesting thing straight off the bat. We, and you specifically, spend a lot of your time with a nose in a Glencairn glass with cask strength whiskies, some of the oldest whiskies sitting in casks in Scotland, which is an incredible job. But what have you got in your glass tonight?
Well, this is probably going to surprise you, shock you, maybe amaze you, maybe disappoint you. I don't know. But this is my sort of regular tipple of a Friday night, a Saturday night, sitting at home watching a movie, whatever. I don't know if you can tell from that, and just in case, it's not a heavily sherried whiskey. It's not that because of that. What I'm actually drinking here at the moment is whiskey and Coke, whiskey and Diet Coke. I used to drink rum and Diet Coke, amongst other things, and because I was at a meeting last year, that it was the SWA Members Day down in Edinburgh, and one of the guests was Dave Broom, the whiskey writer, and he was on stage giving about a speech later on in the afternoon. And he was saying, well, we're all a bit too sort of pretentious about whiskey at times, Scotch whiskey. Only add water and only a drop or two. And he says, that's wrong. We drink rum and Coke, we drink Jack Daniels and Coke, we drink lots of things in Coke. Why don't you drink whiskey and Coke? So I went out that night with a few colleagues from the industry, let's say, visited one or two bars, and we decided, right, let's give this a try. Whiskey and Coke. And I have to say, I absolutely love it. So that's my opening cocktail. For tonight will be just a whiskey and Coke, so slange it.
Slange it. I think there's something quite powerful in that, because my job as the ambassador is to go out and a lot of the time bust some myths around about how we present and drink whiskey. And I'm always telling people, try whiskey cocktails, try whiskey in a mixer. I'm drinking a whiskey sour tonight. My wife's a little bit annoyed that I used the last lemon. She started really getting into these as well. So here's a sip for her. But yeah, so, and I'm always trying to convince people of that. And especially when you go to some of the real whiskey festivals where people are purists, for lack of a better term, it can be quite a difficult sell. Try whiskey in a cocktail. I think there's something quite powerful about a master distiller saying, "I'm drinking whiskey and Diet Coke," because who's going to challenge you? You know, it's they're going to have a hard job. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things. I mean, the way I look at it is, if you go to a nice restaurant and you want a steak, you're never going to tell or allow anyone to tell you how to have your steak. You have it the way you like it. No, I'm not advocating drinking 36-year-old whiskey with Coke, because you would lose a lot of the subtleties there. But for just a general evening drink to sit back and enjoy, I don't see a problem with it at all. So it's something that I blame Dave Broom. But I'm glad that he actually enlightened me, because I was inclined to be along the ideas as well of, well, you shouldn't really put anything in whiskey other than water, or worst case scenario, some ice. Well, this has got ice in it as well, just to add to the sacrilege.
Yes, quite right, quite right. Now, there's a few people in the chat already, so hello to everyone that's already joined in. And for those of you that are in and you're appalled by the fact that we're both drinking a cocktail right now, don't worry, we will jump into some single malts and we'll get them in the Glencairn, and we'll do that as we're answering some of the questions that come in. And one of the questions that's come in already that probably is a very good segue is from Gregor McQuee, who has been following us regularly for the last week and a half, and I'm sure you'll be getting involved in the festival next weekend. He's asked where Graham's accent is from. Is it Isla? Is the Highlands? I suppose that is a great segue into you telling us a little bit about your career up until now.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, this would probably lose a few of the listeners, I would imagine, when they get bored. But no, my accent is from Orkney. I was born and brought up in Orkney, off the north coast of Scotland. Had no intentions of ever leaving there, because it is a wonderful place to live. But started in the whisky industry at Scapa, initially as a waresman, went off, got married in Edinburgh, went on honeymoon, came back, and got called into the manager's office. Stuart Perry was manager there at the time, so it was him who actually employed me. It's all his fault. And I thought, well, what's going to be happening here? But he actually asked me if I would like to go on shifts as a mashman, because one of the guys was leaving and going to work in the oil industry. So I took that opportunity, worked as a mashman for a couple of years, moved through into the still house for a while, and then got asked if I would like to move into the office to learn the sort of admin side, which I said, yeah, not a problem. So did that, managed to break a leg playing football, which is a bit stupid, considering that was the second time I'd done it.
You were the goalkeeper as well, right?
No, not the first time. First time I was playing left back. Second time I was in goals, yeah. 10 years between, just in case you think it was a strange game, but no. So I came back, worked in the office for a while. I was a trainee brewer, basically was my title. And then Scapa, unfortunately, this was back in December '93, was actually mothballed. So when the bosses came up from Milton Duff, just outside Elgin, to tell us all that this was happening, they took me into a side room and said, "You've heard all that, but in reality, it's not going to impact on you." And I was, okay, why? And well, we're going to move you to Glendronach. Do you know where that is? I went, vaguely east side of Speyside, and as well, slightly further east than that. It's in Aberdeenshire. So myself and my wife flew down, had a look around the place, and well, sort of fell in love with it, to be honest. So moved there as an assistant brewer, and was there for about 3 years. My second child, my son was born when I was at Scapa, my daughter was born when they were at Glendronach. And then after 3 years, Allied Distillers, as it was at the time, decided they were going to flatten the management structure a bit. So the writing was maybe kind of on the wall that I didn't know what my job in the future was going to be. So I applied for a job as an assistant manager at Glenmorangie, not thinking I had any chance in the world of getting a move there, but went to an assessment centre for a couple of days and came back, and a few days later got a phone call saying that they were offering me the role. So absolutely gobsmacked. So the whole family, all four of us, moved up to Tain to live at the distillery. But a year and a half after that, there was a lot of changes internally. My boss at the time, Bill Lumsden, who a lot of you'll know, got promoted. And I still remember that night, actually, when he came down to the mashes. This was a change of shift at 10 o'clock. I was down seeing the night shift guys. And Bill came to the door and says, "Oh, I've got some news for you." And it was all about how he was going to be moving down to Broxburn area, where their head office was at the time. And And we spoke about that for maybe 10 minutes. And then I said, well, what's happening? Distillery manager, I take it that's going to be advertised. And he says, no, that's your job. Wow. Totally taken by surprise. So I did that then for the best part of the next 10 years or so. Moved to Glenglassaugh Distillery, which a lot of people found a rather strange move, to go from arguably one of the most beautiful still houses in Scotland, which Glenmorangie still is in my mind. I'm slightly biased, obviously. To go to Glenglassaugh, which had been shut for 22 years. But having mothballed Scapa and mothballed Glendronach before I left there as well, I did increase capacity at Glenmorangie in my time there, but I just felt there was some sort of romantic calling. Margaret, who's sitting in the room here with me, would say there's no romance in me. But when it comes to whiskey, I definitely had a bit of a romantic idea there of going and reopening a sleeping distillery that had been shut for 22 years. So I went there, did that for 3 years. Absolutely amazing experience to breathe life back into somewhere like that. The sense of achievement was amazing. But after 3 years, we were back in production and the challenge wasn't quite there for me. And I happened to get a phone call from our former chief exec, Bob Anderson, one day. I was actually in Munich airport at the time, coming back home, when Bob phoned me asking me if I would be interested in taking on the sort of general manager role at Tomaten. So I met in with him and Stephen, who's our current MD now. Had a chat about what the role involved and was sold. A couple of drams at 18-year-old, I have to admit, helped sell it. But no, I loved the story they were coming with, what they were trying to do with the brand, with the distillery and everything. So that I saw a huge, wonderful challenge to take on there and haven't regretted a minute of it since. So went there, that'll be, 8.5 years ago now, 9 years comes August. And it's just flown in, but then time flies when you're having fun, because it's a position that I'm quite lucky that I'm more or less a free rein to do what I want with the distillery, with the warehousing and everything. So it's probably the dream job to have in the industry. And well, I absolutely love it. So I have no intentions of leaving for many, many years to come. So that's probably going on slightly longer. I don't know how many listeners we've lost in that time, but that's how I came to be where I am today. And given my life to live over again, I'd sooner not break both my legs, but other than that, wouldn't change a thing.
Glad to know that you're not going to be going anywhere. So that's all right. Stuart Buchanan, who is of Benriach, Glendronach, Glenglassaugh fame, has just commented that 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So you've dodged the Benriach bullet, but you got the other 2 in there. Yep.
Yeah, so I know Stuart well, met him many a times over the years, and I have to admit he's actually a pretty good guy. I hope he's looking after my former 2 distilleries well, because I left them in quite good state, I would say. So hopefully he's inheriting some good whiskies.
That's it. And just when you're saying people in the chat, there's a lot of our team from America tuning in tonight. Lance, Mike, Brad, Rumi's in as well. Lance is drinking a double 14-year-old, which does not surprise me one bit. Rumi has said that he's drinking what Lance is, but I don't think Rumi has a big enough glass to drink what Lance is. So, guys, great to have you in. Send in any questions that you have for us tonight. So you get the call from Bob and you have the meeting with Stephen and Bob about the time at Tomatin. Now, back at that time, even it's 8.5 years ago, Tomatin's a very different company then. It's a very different distillery then from what it is now. So what was the pitch to you, the idea that they sold to you?
It was basically they were looking for want of a better description, looking for some fresh blood. There's a lot of generations of guys and girls at Tomatin who have been there all their working lives. The former Master Distiller, Dougie Campbell, is a prime example. He was there 54 years. I think that's the longest apprenticeship ever. But, he lived and worked there all his days, which means tremendous knowledge of the distillery, the people, everything. But you sometimes miss out on bringing in new ideas, arguably best practices or just things doing slightly different that you pick up as you travel around different distilleries. And I know we're quite good as an industry of visiting other places and picking up some hints and tips and ideas. But when you actually work in a place for a few years, you do learn the sort of idiosyncrasies. And if you can bring some of that fresh thinking to the table, it's always a good idea. Plus, I mean, I was fortunate. I've learned from some tremendous people in the industry. Some of them are well known. I mentioned Bill Lumsden there earlier on. Well, some of the wood management side, he's well renowned in that, and I was working with him for lots of years on that. But there's people in the industry as well that I've learned from. One guy I probably learned the most from was brewer at Scapa when I joined there, a guy, Fred Sinclair, who's unfortunately dead and gone now. But Fred was an absolute brilliant brewer. He would be up to his elbows in oil trying to fix a boiler, and knew everything about how it worked. And the level of enthusiasm and knowledge he had was fantastic. So a combination of all of these kind of things, learning about wood and fresh ideas and some of the old stuff as well, to bring that into Tomatin, to look at what we were doing at the time and see if there was ways we could make improvements. Not necessarily improving the whiskey, because some of the whiskies from back in the 60s, 70s, 80s is beautiful, but just trying to get more consistency and maybe even more efficiency and all that. So it was quite a long, wide remit of the role to try and take on board. But that's what makes it interesting, because doing the same thing every day will get boring. So if you've got lots of areas you can look at and play around with and tweak, it's fantastic. Fantastic.
So what are some of the bigger changes, or the most significant changes that you feel that you've brought to the distillery in the time that you've been there?
Well, the single biggest thing I did when I first joined, and I joined, as I said, in August back in 2011, and I looked at what we were doing. Now, everyone will know that Tomatin at one time was the biggest malt whisky distillery in Scotland, and it was running 24/7 round the clock. But things hadn't really changed from that. We had reduced down to 5-day week, but we were still running it as though we were in 24/7. So the whole distillery equation wasn't balanced. We were filling 2 and a bit stills from one washback, and there wasn't any sort of consistency there. So there was nothing being done wrongly, I hasten to add, but it just wasn't as consistent as I would like to see. So I'd come from every distillery I worked at where it was very much balanced. So the first thing I did was look, right, can we increase the mash size slightly more volume in the washbacks, so we can actually fill 3 wash stills, because we've got 6 wash stills at the distillery. So one washback will fill all 3, second washback will fill the next 3, and then instead of running the spirit stills as soon as we had enough low wines or faints or combination, right, let's run it as a batch. So the spirit stills are more or less the same size, so we only need 4 of them due to the volumes the way it works. So that was really the first thing I did, was increase the mash size, increase the volume in the washback slightly lower the volume going into each of the wash stills, and then get it that 2 mashes equals 1 run of all 10 stills, the 6 wash stills and the 4 spirit stills. Now, I'm not going to claim that improves the spirit quality, but the one thing it does is it gives you more consistency. So every time we go to do a filling, we're going to know exactly, well, within reason exactly, how much spirit we're going to have to fill. Whereas if you're leaving the low wines slightly different to the faints, and every batch going into a still, you can sometimes even have blind runs where it doesn't ever become strong enough alcohol to actually go on spirit. So by balancing the whole thing up, you get more consistency and more symmetry in the whole thing, so it makes it easier to do. So that was the first big sort of change I had. I was doing that. The second one is primarily come along because the company has become more and more successful. So I've been fortunate. I've inherited a lot of very, very good whiskies, but I've now also been given the opportunity to spend more money on casks, because I think everyone knows that 60, 70, 80% of the final character in a whiskey comes from the cask. So if you can buy good quality and sometimes unusual cask, you can add so much more into that final characteristic. So combination of more consistency in production and more variety and opportunity with more cash to spend on the cask side of things is really the 2 biggest single features that I've had direct involvement. Obviously, the branding has changed, the packaging's changed, the marketing strategies have changed. So there's lots of things going on around all that, and it is very much teamwork. But the key influences that I'm involved in is obviously the production and on the maturation side.
Now, the maturation side is one that ties into a question that Gregor had sent in, and it was actually a question that he had sent me a couple of months ago on a message on Instagram, and I believe I was in, I think it was Sweden or something, and just never had the time to fully dissect the question and go into it. And then when we started doing these videos, we said, send us any questions and I'll answer them. And Gregor sent the same question again. And I've postponed it because I think it's one that you are probably the most equipped to deal with. And that question is all around how we dial in on a product. And I think for me, it's separated into two sides. It is the cask selection, both in terms of what would we buy in to put the spirit into, and also then the cask selection from the sense of this liquid's great, let's get it in a bottle. So I don't know if you want to talk through the whole process of creating products. And I think what I would add to your time at the distillery, and like you say, it's maybe more a brand thing as a whole, is that in the time that you've been there, that's really when we've started to bottle limited editions. Before that, we never really did that. There's a few behind me tonight. And as you're answering this question, I'm going to dive into the 2006 Amontillado sherry cask that we bottled last year, which for me is probably the best sherry matured Tomatin I've ever tried. And I'm looking forward to cracking this bottle now.
Fair enough. First question I've got, before I answer that question, I'm going to ask you one. I obviously work in the wrong department here, because you've got all this fantastic bottles of Tomatin sitting on the shelves behind you there. I've got a spider plant. There's something not quite right there. I'm going to have to look into this. But no, to look at producing a new whiskey, a new expression, different variety, special editions, and all that, it's kind of almost fortuitous in some ways, because, as I say, I did inherit some fantastic whiskies, and some of them were already in unusual casks. And all it is then is going into the warehouse and drawing samples, nosing them, tasting them. Obviously, horrendous job, and deciding that, that is ready to go, that is good enough to represent the brand, and worrying that you don't leave them too long, that they become over matured, slightly woody sometimes, etc. And that isn't just down to me. That's down to a team. We've got a few people with really good sense of smell that work in the company, that we will always use them as a sort of testing bed, let's say, for the whiskey to make sure it's ready. It's not just down to me with my nose. I wouldn't even claim my nose is that particularly good, so you need teamwork there to do that side. But the other way of getting into the cask selection, as far as what wood you're going to fill your spirit into, is sometimes driven by the consumer. So you can have it that it's the casks you have available, and you nose them and you feel that they are ready for use. But you can also say, right, what would the consumers in a certain market, or even globally, find interesting, find plenty of character in, and be really keen to try. So that can sometimes come from our sales guys, who are speaking obviously to people in market, who are feeding back this information, so they can come and say, right, can we find such and such type of cask, whether it be a wine cask, a rum cask, an Amontillado cask, as you're trying there. And then the job, the responsibility is to go out, speak to the cooperages that we've built up relationships with over the years, all over the world, and see what casks are available. And if we can source the kind of cask that's being asked for, fantastic. Not always possible to do, because some of them are very rare, obviously. But if you can get them, that is absolutely brilliant. But also during that conversation with the coopers and the cask suppliers, you quite often get told, well, you're looking for that, but we've actually got this. Would that be of interest? So it's fortuitous, as I say, that it falls into your lap. You've got this, it may only be a dozen casks, or it may be 100 casks that are unusual, rare, and it's just an opportunity that happens to come along. And you go, I think that'll work. And some of that goes back to, there's no science really behind it, I don't believe. I think it's a case of knowing what the cask may bring to the whiskey, and knowing what the whiskey can work with. And if you can marry the two of our ideas up, it obviously gives you a chance to produce something that is outstanding and very, very special. So some of it's good luck, some of it is down to judgment and information coming from other parts of the team to try and look for specific whiskies that you can create. And then even when you have let's say, an educated guess of what the whiskey is going to turn out like, when you stick it, if it's like, say, a finishing cask, when you're only putting it in there for maybe a year, 2, 3, 4 or 5 years, at the end of its maturation, you're never going to be 100% sure what's going to come out the other end. So the next time you go, maybe 6 months down the line and draw a sample out, that's quite an exciting time because you're obviously hopeful that it's going in the direction you anticipate, but you never know for sure. But thankfully, 9, even 9.5 times out of 10, it actually works out very well. And it makes some fantastic whiskies, which keeps the interest going.
Sorry, Graham. I just saw that we dipped out there a little bit, I think. So for anyone that's watching, obviously in the times that we're in right now, there's a lot more people on YouTube, there's a lot more people online, and we've been getting warnings all day from the service that we use here that the connection is not as stable as we'd maybe wish for. So if we do dip in and out, hopefully we'll be back. So please bear with us when that sort of thing happens. So I guess to your point as well, Graham, there's a little bit of, when it's a new cask that you've never used before, it's often best guess and wishes. But I think there's also obviously the having an incredible knowledge of the spirit and the casks that you're going to put into that.
Yeah, I think you need, as I say, you need to marry the two up together. There will be some casks that probably just wouldn't work really with Tomatin spirit because it's quite a light, fruity, delicate new make spirit. So although, as I said earlier, it was the 18-year-old, which is our most heavily sherried core expression, that helped persuade me to join the company. And I'm not usually a big sherry cask whiskey fan. I prefer the ex-bourbon, the lighter style, slightly sweeter. It's maybe because I've got a sweet tooth, which for a diabetic's not the best of things to have, but it's that probably is why I err to the lighter, sweeter, sort of coconutty type style you get from the ex-bourbon cask. But it's a case of, with Tomatin, you need to treat it carefully because it is relatively light and delicate. At the same time, you can go to some of our older expressions, which have been in sherry cask for quite a long while, and it can handle that as well. Some of the best whiskies, I reckon, in fact, the best whiskey, and I'll quite happily go on record as saying this, the best whiskey I've ever tried is a 1976 Tomatin, which sits upstairs in number 6 warehouse. It's still there, and that is undoubtedly the most complex, the most sophisticated, best balanced, and most intriguing whiskey I've ever tried. And it's in a refill hogshead. So the cask itself can lend a big influence, especially the former contents in sherry. But it can also be the length of time it sits there and breathes, the oxidation-based maturation that can add that complexity and layers and such like. So it depends. It's not a simple strategy to have because you don't want to put a whiskey into, let's say, an Oloroso sherry cask that may end up being left there for 40 years. Because I think that would mask a lot of the lighter, more delicate notes that you find in Tomatin. At the same time, there is nothing wrong with having Tomatin being matured in refill cask. Once that have been used 2 or 3 times before, put it in there. The wood isn't going to have such an influence because it's been rinsed out a few times. You get, as I say, that oxidation-based flavours. And then that complexity you can marry with a sherry cask, but it may only be in there for 2.5, 3 years because you don't want to overwhelm subtle flavours. You want to complement them, but still allow them to come to the forefront and not be masked. So there's a bit of juggling around with it and trying to figure out what the spirit will work with, how long to leave it in a specific type of cask. So as I say, I don't think there's a science to it. There's some imagination involved. There's also quite a bit of experimentation involved, and then there's sometimes just plain old gut feel. And as I say, I've maybe been very, very fortunate, but most of the time it's actually turned out quite well.
Yeah, I think I'm yet to find a bad one, that's for sure. But as you've been talking there's been a few questions coming in. I think the point you mentioned there about liquids that have been in refill hogsheads for quite some time and have oxidized, and then you maybe give them a little bit of time in something else to bring in new flavors. A great example of that is the 77 from the Warehouse 6 collection with the Sauternes casks.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful marriage of flavor there. And that taps into something that Lance had been asking, and you've kind of answered his question already. He'd been asking, obviously Lance was over and was in the warehouse and probably got to see that 1976 cask that you love so well. I think he probably saw it quite up close and personal, shall we say. So Lance was asking, is the plan for that to be the final bottling in the Warehouse 6 collection? And if so, why? And I think you've answered his question. It's the best whiskey you've ever tried, so it's a fitting end to that series. But there's a few more questions that have come in on the way, so I just want to pick up on them before we go any further. So the first one that I saw coming in was from Sam Clark, talking about the 2006 that I'm drinking now. What style of sherry was that, and how does it differ either from PX, Oloroso, or Fino? So, Sam, this is an Amontillado sherry cask, and in terms of the sherry itself, the liquid, it kind of sits in between Fino and Oloroso. It has the dryness of a Fino. It starts off maturing like a Fino, but then the floor dies back and it has that oxidative maturation and brings on more of the nutty characters that you'd get in an Oloroso. And it's worked incredibly well. A 3-year finish here on a 12-year whiskey. Just looking through the message as well, it turns out that it was only me that dropped out of the stream, and I guess that's probably for the better. So if I drop out again, Graham, we're just going to let you start talking, start presenting a masterclass. Shay Francis, what was the last unusual cask type that you used that worked surprisingly well at Tomatin Distillery? Can you think of anything that maybe something that you took in thinking this could work and then it actually turned out really good?
Good question, actually. I mean, I've got a few whiskies sitting around me tonight. They're not behind me, but I do have a few sitting here. I would say I would probably go for this one, which is the Caribbean Rum Cask. Sorry, that's the wrong one I've got there. It's too dark in here. I have the Caribbean Rum Cask. There we go. But when we got that one, rum casks, I'm never always 100% sure how good they're going to be. Reason for that being, you don't know how long the rum's been in them and what influence it's going to have, and even the style of rum, because quite often they're just described as being rum casks. Well, you get light rum, you get dark rum, you get so many different rums, so you're kind of taking a chance unless you know the real history of it. But I have to say that that one was outstanding. The whiskey that came from it. Again, it's maybe there was a bit of sweetness coming through from the rum there, and I mentioned earlier at the start that I quite like the odd rum and coke and such like. So that to me, that one, I wasn't really sure what effect it was going to have, but it came out absolutely outstanding. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a difficult one to actually answer because there's so many. Because as I said, you're never really 100% sure what's going to come out. It is kind of educated guesswork. But we had the Tempranillo casks. You know, they were fantastic as well. There's so many of them been over the years that it's difficult to pick any one out as being the outstanding one. They're all outstanding. Okay, I'm biased, yeah, I know. But it's a case of I've always been pleasantly surprised, sometimes more so, sometimes less so, but always pleasantly surprised with just how good the Tomatin whiskey marries in with the different style of cask.
Yeah, and I think that the rum's a great example because that's one that so what you've got there, I believe, is the 9-year fully matured in rum.
That's right, yeah, that is the fully matured one, yeah.
And then since then, we've gone back in and done another rum cask that I've got behind me here, and that's a 1-year finish. And it's incredible that the rum is pronounced in both of them, but it delivers it in a different way. And it's just that sweetness, the banana flavors for me that come through across both of those.
Yeah.
and that maybe ties back to John Wells' question. Do you have a favourite style of Tomatin?
Well, now that's like asking me to choose my favourite child. I have a favourite son and a favourite daughter. Well, that's because I'm lucky enough to have one of each, so it saves any arguments. But favourite style of Tomatin? I think that really depends on the circumstances. If it's in the middle of summer, sitting out on the decking, having a nice dram at a weekend, whatever, I would probably go Legacy because it's something that's quite light, fruity, even ice in there, make it into a longer drink even. But in the middle of winter, when it's blowing a hoolie outside and you're looking for something a bit heavier, richer, 18-year-old takes a bit of beating. Anytime the 12-year-old, the 14-year-old, 15, 21, 36, 40, 50-year-old's not bad, I have to say. So it is very, very difficult to choose one. It does depend on the circumstances. It depends on the time of year, where you're at, who you're with. So many ones that I would really struggle to choose a favourite. And other than that 1976 cask that I mentioned.
Yeah, it was a question I was asked the other week there, and I almost find it difficult to measure your favourite. Is it the bottle that you drink most often, or is it the one that you save for the special occasion? Because if it's the one you drink most often, it's Legacy because I'll use it in a cocktail or something like that. If it's something I save for a special occasion, it's maybe something different. So, it's always hard to. I guess it's whatever's in the glass at the time you're drinking, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah, especially if someone else is buying it.
Yeah. True Arcadian coming through now.
Absolutely.
Now, Gregor's popped back in to ask, what was one of the hardest drams for us to kind of finalise? So one of a bottling that was maybe difficult to pull together the final recipe. Well, I think
this may actually surprise folk, or may disappoint folk. I don't know. The one that's always the most difficult to get the recipe just right on is actually the 12-year-old. Reason being, it's the most complex recipe of all the whiskies we produce, but it's also one of the core expressions. So you're trying to get consistency there. And with a single malt, we've got reasonably good stocks, obviously, in the wherries, but they're still finite, they're still limited. That's not very easy one to get dialed in 100% every time, because you can have, especially not so much with the ex-bourbon casks because they're reasonably stable and consistent, but sherry casks, you can buy Oloroso sherry butts and you'll get a load of 60 of them and they'll be fantastic. You buy another load of 60 from the same supplier of similar age and history and they won't be as good. So when you come to then select casks to go into, say, our 12-year-old, you look, first fill Oloroso sherry, second fill Oloroso sherry, you need a certain percentage of each to get the recipe somewhere near right. And then you discover that first fill sherry casks aren't giving you the full depth of character and even colour that you would expect. So it's probably the most difficult one to get dialed into every time, I would say, which is maybe not the answer that was being looked for because it's probably some of the more limited editions that you would expect. But the beauty of limited editions is that you don't have to get consistency. If it's going to be a one-off, it is a one-off. The flavours that are there. The nose, the aromas are all there, but you don't have to try and repeat them again. So the core expressions are actually the worst one. And of that, it's definitely the 12-year-old.
Yeah. I think on the limited editions as well, we have you certainly have the freedom to say that's not ready. Let's look at another parcel of stock. There's maybe something that you considered using as a limited edition needs another year. And you can look at something else in the meantime. So that it's maybe... that's where the 12-year-old's not quite as simple because you have to bottle it every month almost. So
that's right. But that's part of the fun and the challenge and the adventure of trying to make whiskey. You'll never ever get 100% right the whole time. But as long as you can keep it within certain parameters, that it's reasonably consistent, not too many peaks and troughs. That's the name of the game. So that's where some companies have their master blender that looks after all that, and it's one person, one nose. We don't work that way. We've got a team, that I would hate to rely on one person's sense of smell because what happens if they've got a cold type idea? Do you stop until it's cleared up? So I think the teamwork side, and that's where we've got a very small, compact, but really enthusiastic team at Tomatin. Everybody pulls their weight. everybody enjoys what they do, and they're keen to get involved in things. So our new distillery manager, Janice Mayer, who's joined us just at the start of this year, she's setting up nosing panels, getting some of the visitor centre, the tour guides involved. And they only may be there, in the summer for a few months, but she's still quite keen to get them involved because it's a different nose, a different sense of smell. And that adds into the whole mix that if we can get as many people nosing as possible, it means you should really get more consistency there.
Yeah. Now, Rumi's asked a question that is something that interests me as well. Rumi in Canada, he pointed out earlier on that I referred to him as a member of the American team.
I didn't know that, and I was going to comment. I thought he would have a dig at you for that one.
Yeah, he did, and I'm sure he will again. But Rumi asked, Graham, when tasting casks, what do you look for to determine which casks to bottle at a younger age versus an older age? How do you determine that one cask is ready now and another one maybe needs a bit more time?
It really depends on what the style of whiskey you're trying to create is. Take for instance the Legacy. Okay, there's younger casks in that. Some of it's virgin oak casks, which don't take long to mature at all, because there's so much extractives coming from the wood. So it really does depend on the style of whiskey you're trying to create. And the style of whiskey, take for instance the Legacy. It's not been on the go that long particularly, but it was a case of Stephen came to me one day and says, look, we're trying to create a whiskey that's quite light, sweet, vibrant, and we decided, right, the best way to go on this, well, first of all, I had a look through the stock profile to see what we had and if there was any casks we could spare, for want of a better word. And we eventually came up with I came up with 5 recipes. We narrowed that down in a small group to 3. And then the 3 were given out to all members of staff to actually take home and nose and taste at their leisure and feedback whether they liked A, B, or C. And from that, about 2/3, if I remember rightly, came back saying that it was actually A, the preferred. So that's how the Legacy, or Dualchus in the state, that's how that was actually developed, because we were looking for a certain style of whiskey. And we knew that by using first fill ex bourbon for 85% of the product and 15% virgin oak, or thereabouts, the sort of ratio, that we would get a lot of the sweet coconut, vanilla type characteristic in there. So we knew that would be ready at a relatively young age. Whereas if you're trying to create a whiskey that is much more complex and much more sophisticated, you'll have to use a range of different casks. And the one thing you can't speed up is the oxidation. I remember I was speaking with Ed Dodson, he was in the industry for 4 decades plus, based at Glenmorangie Distillery. And I remember Ed speaking about how he had this plan, which he thought was a great idea. I don't know if he was serious or not, but his idea was you would get a barge and you would moor it just offshore and use it as a warehouse, because the casks inside then would be moving all the time, so that the whiskey would be stirring up and mixed inside the cask and have more wood contact, so you would speed up maturation, which the theory of that is absolutely spot on, would definitely work. But the one thing you can't speed up is the oxidation, because that's the breathing in and out of the cask. So going back to Rumi's question, it really depends on the style of whiskey you're trying to create. So that if you're looking for something that is quite young, vibrant, sweet, you'll use casks that can actually mature quite quickly and give you that character. And that way you don't lose so much of the new make spirit style as well, which is this light fruity character. Whereas if you want something more complex, you've got to leave it for longer. So you choose casks that will allow it to breathe without overwhelming it. But you may have to mix in some full maturation sherry casks or full maturation rum cask or whatever it may be into the mix, if you're trying to create a certain style. That was a really long answer to quite a short question.
It's a fantastic answer, though, and actually, your story about the barge goes back to another question that was asked. Over in the States, the producers will sometimes talk about a sweet spot in a warehouse. Have you ever come across that in Scotland, whether that's at Tomatin or any other distilleries, that there's a particular place that has something about it that makes whiskey better? Or
yeah, I mean, the general consensus is that an old-fashioned thick stone-walled, slate-roofed dunnage warehouse with an earthen floor will give you the best maturation. Reason being that it almost acts like a natural air conditioning unit. You know, the earthen floor keeps it nice and cool in the summer, but it keeps it slightly warmer in the winter. You're getting heat coming up from the soil below. So the climate is actually very stable, so the maturation doesn't speed up and slow down. You go to the top of a rack warehouse where you're 9, 10 casks high, 6, 7, 8, 9 meters up into the air. In the summertime, which we do occasionally get in Scotland, you get sun on the roof and it gets very warm, so the maturation speeds up. And then in the winter, obviously it'll slow down, so you've got peaks and troughs in maturation. Now, that's not necessarily bad. It's just less consistent over the years, so that I've always been led to believe by all the really knowledgeable, experienced guys I've worked with that if you can get a nice old-fashioned dunnage warehouse, you will have the best casks, the best maturation in that. And to a certain extent, at Tomaten, I think that is emphasised by the Warehouse 6 collection. You know, Warehouse 6 dunnage warehouse, oldest one we've got on site that we actually use, and that gives us some of the best whiskies that come out of the warehouses there. And it is probably because it's got the different style of maturation altogether. It's not in racks. Now, racks, there's nothing wrong with. I don't have a problem with them at all. If you take the stuff from the bottom of the rack warehouse, it's going to be not dissimilar to dunnage. Midway up, slightly different, but right at the top, there will be changes there. And you know that in the States, it used to be that they would rotate the casks, from top to middle to bottom. I don't know if they do that so much now, or if they use a selection of certain amount from each level to give them more the consistency, because there's an awful lot of manpower moving casks around every day, so it's a case of, given the choice, I would love to have 20 dunnage warehouses at the distillery that are best for maturation, but they're very labour intensive and very expensive to build because you don't get an awful lot of casks under that one roof space. So rack warehouses make more sense financially. Palletized makes even more sense still, but I'm not a huge fan of them. Certainly not for single malts. I think they're okay for grain whiskey, where you're putting it in there and using a large volume in a short time. But for single malt, you want to be able to select individual casks. Whereas in a palletized, you can only take the one at the top, at the front, and you've got to take that out to get to the ones below, to get to the ones behind. You don't have that same problem, or not to the same extent in a rack warehouse. So, no, dunnage is my favourite. That's maybe because 1976 is sitting upstairs in the dunnage warehouse as well.
The sweet spot's just underneath the window.
It is, right in the middle. Yeah, right in the middle. Stove 5 upstairs, warehouse 6.
Now you're just giving that's the X on the map now. People will be chasing that down. There was another question there that maybe is a little bit more about branding and marketing, but also talks a little bit to stock management. And maybe you can shine a light on that. It's from Todd. He's saying there's a strong trend in the US with distilleries removing age statements and bottling to meet demand. Are you feeling the same trend? I think from the marketing side, the move towards non-age statements happened probably the best part of 10 years ago. We saw quite a wave of that, and we have a couple in our range as well. But I think what a large part of your job is making sure that we still have stocks to bottle age statement products.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a stock control management system, a software package at work, which is very, very powerful. What I do is I export out of that into an Excel spreadsheet, so I can use different colors to highlight different cask types. It's all done automatically type thing. And I probably spend more time looking at that spreadsheet than any other, because it is the one that I've even got it set up that it almost forecasts the future. So, Graham Nicholson, our sales director, he will give an estimate, a budget, a plan of what they're hoping to actually distribute into market, not only for this year, but for next year, next 5 to 10 years almost. And okay, some of that is definitely crystal ball stuff, so that you can't ever get it 100% perfect. I wish you could. So what I do is I use that figure with maybe a bit of margin in there just in case, to look at how much first fill X bourbons, second fill X bourbons, first fill X Oloroso sherry and such like, I'm going to need in 12 years from now to try and satisfy that market. So it is crystal ball. Again, some of that comes down to just a bit of experience. A lot of it comes down to forecasts. But I mean, some of the products that we've launched, take the Legacy or Dualchus, for instance, that climbed far steeper than we ever imagined. But we were in a good place in as much as we had fairly good levels of stock to satisfy that. But it could have been that we just couldn't, So that's part of the process, is looking at what you've got before you launch a new core expression. But trying to balance stocks over the years, I would say it's one of the dark arts. You're really looking into the future, and you sometimes have to tweak the recipe because you've not got spirit in the right style of casks for the right length of time. So you may have to add in slightly more first fill ex bourbons because you've not got enough of the second fills, or and you're trying to tweak the recipe to get that consistency I mentioned earlier there. So my ultimate aim before I retire is to have exactly the right amount of spirit in the right type of cask for the right length of time, so that there is 100% consistency there. It's the holy grail as far as stock control goes. So I'm still working on it.
Yeah, if there's any other distillers in the chat that have figured that one out, if you can just send us a little message, that would be greatly appreciated.
That's grateful.
There's a message in from Roy at Aquavite. Roy, good to have you joining along. Warehouse 6 is a beautiful way to spend time. It definitely is. We got to spend a good bit of time there. Roy, for anyone tuning in, will be your guide to the Lockdown Whisky Festival next Saturday. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to speaking to you then, Roy. So that's talked a lot about what your role has been from the time that you started at Tomatin, but your role changed last year somewhat. You already alluded to the fact that Janice has now joined us in the position of distillery manager. So you've been moved from distillery manager to master distiller. How does that change your day-to-day life at the distillery?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's still developing. Would be it's work in progress. Would be the honest answer. That the benefit of having Janice now is that she comes in with a wealth of experience as well, from a really fantastic whisky company, and she's bringing that new ideas in to how we do things, and that has allowed me to take maybe a step back and look at more the strategic side of the business, as in looking longer term. Instead of necessarily worrying about the new make spirit quality and how efficient the stills are running and all that, I can step away from that and spend more time looking at the stocks, the recipes, planning for the future, how we're going to ensure that we can continue to help build the brands, but keep the consistency, keep the quality there at the same time. So, excuse me, maybe more time looking at casks, looking at maturation, looking at stock control, and letting her look after the day-to-day shorter term stuff. I mean, the shorter term stuff feeds into the long term stuff, obviously. So we work very closely together, and share a lot of information between us. We chat every day, many times a day. Her office is actually directly opposite mine, and the doors are never closed. So it's a case of we're in constant discussion. So it's basically that I have taken as I say, a slight step back from the coal face of looking after everything in production and the warehousing side, and become more on the strategic side, with the longer planning aspects of it.
Yeah. And one of the other questions that came in, totally different question actually, but something we actually talked a little bit about earlier on today, was independent bottlings of Tomatin.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And what your opinion of independent bottlings are, and also where do they get the stock from? We're using so much of it ourselves. So, and while you're answering that again, it just so happens that I've got another dram that will chime in. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm asking these questions when I'm looking for a segue into my next whiskey. So
I've not really had any tastes of my whiskey here yet. I'm slipping up here.
I'm just getting you to talk a lot so that I can just sit back and enjoy with everybody else. So I think I've finally figured this YouTube thing out. Just let you talk.
Yeah, I came on here thinking I was going to be a bit like Chris O'Dowd when he was on the last leg, having too many drinks and a bit tipsy, type idea. But this seems to be working in reverse. You're with them hills and you're getting to drink this time. That's not fair. We'll need to get this resolved. But
I think I've finally sussed it.
Yes.
So what I'm going to drink is actually a bottle that was given to me by a friend who works at Cadenhead, by Cameron McGeehee, when he was at the distillery last year. It's a 10-year-old Tomatin, 53%, part of their authentic collection. And it's a lovely expression. And what it does really well is shows the quality of the Tomatin spirit. It's a traditional hogshead. There's nothing fancy about the cask, but it's a great expression of Tomatin. So, Graham, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that Tomatin used to be, when it was a huge distillery and big production levels. We were producing spirit for lots of other people, mainly to go into their blend. So that there was hardly a blend in Scotland that didn't have some Tomatin in it, back in the 70s type idea. Because of that, there was a lot of stock actually out in the marketplace, and there's whisky brokers, whisky dealers, that will deal in whisky, and then your independent bottlers will come along and they will buy a cask from them. It's becoming more and more difficult for them to do this, because there's less and less volume out there, because quite a lot of distilleries now don't actually sell their spirit, certainly not under its own actual name, into the marketplace. And the reason for that, I think, is quite sensible, that as our brand becomes bigger and more widely known, we want to safeguard the quality of that product, whether it be the packaging or the actual juice inside the bottle. We want to make sure that is up to a level that we find acceptable. But there's a lot of the independent bottlers out there that actually do have very good quality whisky and good quality casks that we would certainly be more than happy to have our name go on. And to a certain extent, if you go back before the time when Tomatin, when we were actually selling it ourselves as a single malt, and emphasising that was where we wanted to go, the strategy of the business changed to be more brand driven rather than bulk whisky driven. So that to a certain extent, we have used the quality and the bottlings that the independent guys were doing years ago to introduce people, the consumers, public, whisky drinkers at large, into our product, so that I think to a certain extent we'll do them a debt of gratitude for what they've done in helping to get our name out there. But at the same time, as I say, the good ones are very good, but there are maybe one or two rogue ones out there sometimes that, the quality's maybe just not quite up to what we would want to see our whisky in. But that's very rare that you get anything like that. So overall, I think the independent bottlers, they're normally doing smaller runs. It may only be one cask or a handful of casks at a time. And that in itself is a bit like our limited editions, that it adds slightly different characteristics into the product. And as I say, as long as the quality's good enough, which again, 99 times out of 100 it is, because the Tomatin spirit, it wouldn't have been asked for in all that blended whisky going back over the years, back in the 1970s and such, like when we expanded for the last time. Tomatin was well sought after because it is such a good whisky to use in blends because of the style and the character that it has. So obviously the independent bottlers want to get hold of that, and it's going to make some good final character whisky in the bottles as well. So I'm not either strongly for or against the independent bottlers. I think they've definitely got their share of the market, and they're quite entitled to that. And long may it be that they can continue getting good whiskies out there for enthusiasts to have a chance to actually try and drink.
Yeah, I mean,
have your dram.
Sorry,
is that long enough talking to have your dram?
I'm definitely into it now. Yeah. So I was speaking to Mark Watt, who until last year was at Cadenheads, and they had done a few bottlings of Tomatin, and he made a very good point, and I'll paraphrase it for the ears of those watching. It's hard to muck up a good spirit, so it's very, very rare that you'll find a bad Tomatin because the spirit is very, very good. And I think my take on independent bottlings, just to throw my 2 cents in, has always been that I love independent bottlings, and I think that they're at their best when they offer something that you don't otherwise see. So, for example, when they show a spirit that otherwise isn't bottled as a single malt, like Tomatin would have been, or if it is a spirit that's already bottled by a brand, when they do something different. So no one's going to be able to create a better Tomatin 12-year-old, certainly not on the scale than what we do. What I love about this bottling here is the fact that it is Tomatin in hogsheads. and that's something that we otherwise wouldn't normally release. So it's quite nice to see it, and it's been done well.
Feedback.
There was no question there. Actually, there was no question at all. So I guess we're running close to the hour mark there. That's kind of where we said that we would cap it off. But I think the natural next question is, well, Brad's chimed in. He'll ask the second to last one. What's the best mark of Tomatin to enjoy when you're dining on a haggis?
Oh, well, any of them really. I mean, it depends on who makes the haggis, because you've got really world-class haggis and you've got maybe slightly less so haggis. So obviously, really depends on which one you're on. But to be honest, if I was going to choose a whiskey to go with a good plate of haggis, I would probably go for a 12-year-old, because I think it's got such a nice balance of flavours in there. It's not too light and delicate. It's not too deep and rich. It's quite in harmony. And I think that would allow a lot of the spicier flavours from the haggis to come through, but be complemented by that. So 12-year-old would be the one I would go for. But again, each to their own. I'm not going to tell you how to eat your haggis or what you're going to drink with it. But probably the best thing to do is actually experiment. Try them all, see which one you like best, and then try a second haggis and try again to see which one you like best. Experimentation is definitely the way forward.
You're going to need a lot of haggis to get through our range. Roy's in from Aquavite, and what I love about Roy's channel is he always gets people in talking about whiskey epiphany moments, like moments when they've been drinking a whiskey that they've just thought, this is an incredible moment. I'll have this with me for the rest of my life. Have you ever had a moment that stands out to you as quite a wow moment?
Quite a lot of them, actually. I'm in a very fortunate position that I've had access to so many warehouses with so many casks over the last 30 years that I've been working in the industry. So there was casks at Scapa that were outstanding, mostly ex-bourbon actually, which Scapa suits quite well. When I was at Glendronach, as I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of sherry cask matured whiskey, but some of the sherry butts that were in the warehouse right next to the office at Glendronach were absolutely amazing. Some of the best sherry casks I've ever tried. So as I say, I'm fortunate. I was at Glenglassaugh. There was casks there from the 1960s that were beautiful. That Glenmorangie obviously had quite a lot there as well. So every distillery that I've been at has had fantastic whiskies in the warehouses, straight from the cask, for quality control purposes, obviously. Dosing and maybe occasionally having to have a taste as well of them type idea. So I've been exposed to unbelievably good whiskies over the years. So to try and pick one that's had the wow moment, there's been way too many wow moments. So that there's so many fantastic casks that I've had the opportunity to try that every single one of them have been wow. A few of the guys that are people who have been messaging in there have been at the distillery and tried that cask in number 6, 1976 one. And they have all had that wow moment. I've always had to apologize to them that there are certain things in life that you realize you have reached the pinnacle. And I still believe strongly that once you've tried a sample of that cask of 1976 in warehouse number 6, you've not just reached the pinnacle of whiskey, you have reached the pinnacle of life. Everything is going to be a disappointment thereafter. The only way is down. So I still go back to that one as being the biggest wow moment when I first tried it, but there's been so many.
Now I'm curious, you've just referred to a cask of whiskey as the pinnacle of life. Did Margaret hear you say that? I've not seen anything fly past your head yet.
I'm kind of hoping she's got her headphones in sitting over there, but I'm not 100% sure. She does. She definitely does. She's not paying any attention. It's not even usually paying any attention to me.
You've got away with it. So you mentioned very earlier on, and it was something that's a relief to hear. You're not planning going anywhere anytime soon, so you're going to be leading Tomaten into the future. So just as a final question from my point, where do you want to see Tomaten go, and what do you want to, in your new role as Master Distiller, what do you want to bring to Tomaten over the next few years and hopefully decades?
Consistency. As I said earlier, I would love to have the stock in a situation that when I actually do decide to retire, hang up my village and step back, I would like to leave it in the hands of somebody coming through that it's in a very good place. And most of that is to do with the consistency of the whiskey being really up there, as good as we can possibly make it. From the distillery itself point of view, well, we all know it's kind of been forgotten about this last few weeks because of a certain virus that's going around. But prior to that, there was so much talk about the environment. So we've got a biomass boiler at the distillery. We've had it now for 7 years, type thing. That's a step in the right direction. But I think environmentally, we use a tremendous amount of energy to make whiskey. There's no alternatives because we're doing the distillation process. So that I think if we can find a more environmentally effective way of making the whiskey without taking away from any of the character and quality, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction. I have no wish to automate things any further than we have already. I think that people are what make whiskey. So we have a mashman and a stillman on at any given time. We don't have one man looking at both from a computer screen. Yes, we do have computer screens, but they don't do everything. So I have no wish to go down the technology route any further than we have already. I think it's a great balance we've got. But environmentally, energy efficiency and such like, but consistency of the product, consistency in quality, consistency in the maturation, and just keep building up that stocks to get the perfect balance there. Which is 5 minutes till I get that all sorted out. Easy.
No pressure.
No, none at all.
Well, I think that's a perfect thing to end on, Graham. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. I'm sure everyone will agree that there was some incredibly insightful stuff there, and thank you for sharing that. And thank you everyone for dramming along and having a good night. So we hope to see you over the coming weeks in the tastings and things that we'll be doing. So Graham, thank you, and good night everybody.
Yep, thank you very much. Take care. Good night. Slàinte mhath.